Hello everyone, I'm John Maher. It is Thursday, the 5th of February 2026, and this is your weekly Grass10 update on the Dairy Edge. Well, I don't need to remind you all that the weather has had plenty of rainfall in it, and in particularly the eastern part of the country. Grass growth was a bit below normal last week, but predicted to do a bit better this week. We averaged about 4 kilograms dry matter per hectare last week, which is a bit disappointing, but it was a very, very wet week. The week ahead looks a little bit different, with grass growth probably going to average about 7 or 8 kilos, but those in the southwest particularly closer to 9 or 10 kilos. But there's still a lot of rainfall to happen, I suppose, and it does remain high, particularly in the southern rim. If we change then our tack here for a minute to the grass data that has come in through PastureBase, the average farm cover for early February is now 876, which is about 100 kilos behind where we would want to be for this time of year for most intensive grazing operations. When we look at this a little bit further, it's a case of those who have and those who haven't. I suppose, quickly speaking, 50% of farms have an average farm cover of 750 kilograms of dry matter per hectare, while the other 50% have an average farm cover of over 1,100 kilos. So that's where we're at. It means different grazing plans for many. If the weather improves, those who have the grass will be able to utilize it fairly well. If the weather was to improve substantially, those at lower farm cover would be restricted in grazing allocation. Speaking of grass, the dry matter of grass at the moment is running a bit lower than normal, as everyone would expect with given the way the weather has been. But I suppose the benchmark figure is around 14%. So to look at then the to-do list for the week ahead, many farms still haven't done an average farm cover assessment. I suppose that's not entirely surprising given that the weather has been wet, but now it's time to walk the farm and establish where the farm is at in terms of grass supply. Cows have really started to get going in calving now this week, so there's going to be a big demand there. If you can establish where the farm at is in terms of grass cover, then you can develop a good grazing plan. We also need to develop a grazing plan for dealing with the wet days, because things will be tricky for a spell. To move on, I suppose, and look at the plan for February, the expectation is we'll eventually get grazing more consistently. There are people out at the moment, but it's a case of smash and grab. But ideally, when you get grazing, cows should graze paddocks with medium covers that have a fairly good access. I'm talking about covers of grass of 800 to 1,100 kilograms of dry matter per hectare. This is leafy from top to bottom now, with little or no decay. That's what that grass is. And then, obviously, the weather's been tricky and probably will remain so, but the farmers that have started have been grazing for the 2 or 3 hours, doing the on-off grazing approach. Animals need to go out with an appetite on them. What we mean by that is that they're just not full of silage before they head out to grass. It's a case of managing that silage education carefully. So ideally, if you're letting the cows out at 9 o'clock in the morning, that they would have no silage from about 5 or 6 o'clock on, get milked, get the ration, go out and get grazing, and then if they're not going out that evening, to have silage in the diet when they come back in. The effects of silage in the diet versus meal in the diet in terms of grazing is huge. Every kilo of meal might reduce the grazing appetite of a cow by about 10 minutes, but every kilogram of silage would be 4 or 5 times that. So you get the point here. If the cows are full, their appetite for grazing is very much reduced and can decide to do walking, particularly if the weather is poor, and do damage. So that's the grazing story. Hopefully things will improve and we get moving. For farms that are really tight on grass and tight on feed, doing a grass budget is probably no harm if you have the figures and a feed budget or a fodder budget. This would be a very, very good idea, to be honest. But including this week's newsletter, there are 2 examples of grass budgets done for farms stocked at about 2.8 cows per hectare. One with an opening cover of 1,000 on the 1st of February, another with an opening cover of 750. In summary, there are stark warnings here. The grass allocation is fairly tight with the farm with an opening cover of about 750 kilograms per hectare, and the grazing allocation is tight for a long, long time now. So there's a lot of silage going to go in there, to be honest. All right. When you look at a farm that has 1,000 kilos per hectare of an opening farm cover stocked at 2.8 cows per hectare, this farm, even with a fairly high calving rate, requires very little silage if the weather was anyway reasonable at all. And that's a big story in this. The silage saving during the first rotation is huge when you compare a farm cover of 1,000 versus a farm cover of 750 per hectare at the same stocking rate on the 1st of February of about 2.8. That's really the story of that. The weather hasn't been really suitable for slurry or fertilizer application. Hopefully things will improve, and we can cover that probably in next week's podcast. And we'll also have a farmer feature in next week's newsletter as well. But I suppose to bring this week to a close, if you want to see more detail about what's going on at the moment in terms of the figures, you can access the Grass10 newsletter, and that's also available on the PBI PastureBase interface at the top of the page. Just want to acknowledge those who support the Grass10 campaign, which are AIB, Grass and Agro, Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, the Farmers Journal, and Teagasc. So without further ado, wish you best of luck in the week ahead. The weather has been tricky, but hopefully things will improve, and we'll see you all again next week.